Daniel Kane stood at his kitchen window, coffee forgotten in his hand as meteors streaked across the night sky. Each bright flash reminded him of scalpel blades catching the operating room lights. Memories he'd rather forget. The house creaked around him, as lonely as its sole occupant in the woods. Outside of Mill Creek, population barely worth mentioning on a map. The largest meteor, yet blazed overhead, its blue-white trail illuminating the tree line instead of arcing across the sky like the others. This one plummeted earthward with a sound like thunder. The impact shook the house, rattling the medical journal stacked on his desk and sending his coffee sloshing over the rim. "Damn it!" he muttered, setting down the mug. He grabbed his coat and medical bag. Old habits died. Hard and headed outside, the October air bit through his jacket. As he followed the fading glow through the trees, the impact site smoldered ahead, wisps of steam rising from scorched earth. But what stopped him cold wasn't the small crater or the twisted wreckage scattered around it. It was the woman lying unconscious at its edge. A woman with blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. Daniel's training kicked in before his brain could process what he was seeing. He knelt beside her, checking vitals. Her skin felt fever-hot under his fingers with an odd metallic texture. Dark fluid that might have been blood seeped from multiple wounds. Just another patient, he told himself firmly, though no patient he'd ever treated had looked like this. He began cataloging. Injuries deep, lacerations across her torso, possible internal bleeding, burns along her left side. Her eyes snapped open, solid silver, no pupils, and locked onto his face. One hand shot up to grab his wrist with surprising strength. "How dare you touch me, human?" Her voice carried the weight of command despite its weakness. Daniel carefully maintained his professional demeanor. "I'm a doctor. You're injured, and I'm trying to help. I am ALAA, Queen of the Seven Event Spiral. Your primitive medicine is beneath me." She tried to sit up and immediately paled, her luminescent skin dimming. "Fascinating. Now lie still before you make your injuries worse, Your Majesty." He kept his tone dry as he pressed her shoulder back down. "Unless you'd prefer to bleed out with your dignity intact." Her silver eyes narrowed. "You mock me. I'm saving your life. Mock you later, maybe," he returned to examining her wounds, ignoring her affronted gasp. The injuries were like nothing he'd seen before. The tissue damage followed patterns that defied human anatomy. "Remove your hands or I shall have you executed," she threatened, though her voice wavered. "Add it to my tab." He opened his medical bag now. "This might sting," she hissed as he cleaned the first wound. "Barbaric techniques on my world. We have healing chambers that..." Her words cut off in a pained grunt. "Fascinating. Unfortunately, we'll have to make do with barbaric earth medicine." He worked quickly but carefully, hyper-aware of how alien her physiology was. One wrong move could kill her. "Want to tell me what happened? I do not answer to lesser beings, but..." Her haughty tone cracked as he found a particularly deep wound. "Less, being with a medical degree at your service, he needed to get her somewhere sterile. My house is nearby. You need proper treatment. I will not enter a human dwelling." She tried to stand again and swayed dangerously. Daniel caught her before she could fall. "Your options are my house or bleeding out here. Choose quickly." Her silver eyes met his, and for a moment her royal mask slipped, showing fear and pain beneath. Then it snapped back in place. "Very well, you may assist me, human Daniel," he corrected carefully, lifting her. She was surprisingly light, her skin radiating unnatural, heat against his chest. "Dr. Daniel Kane, I did not ask for your name." But she didn't resist as he carried her through the woods. "No, but you'll be using it soon enough when you need something for the pain." He felt her stiffen. "Unless queens don't feel pain." She muttered something that might have been a curse in an alien language inside his house. Daniel laid her on the examination table in his home clinic. The stark medical lighting revealed the full extent of her injuries and her otherworldly beauty. Her dark hair had an iridescent quality, and patterns like circuitry traced beneath her blue skin. "These wounds," he frowned as he gathered supplies. "They're not from the crash, are they? Your primitive mind could not comprehend." She broke off with a sharp intake of breath as he began cleaning a particularly nasty gash. Try me. I've seen plenty of crash victims. These look more like weapons. Damage or silence spoke volumes. Someone shot you down? He concluded, carefully suturing the wound. Her blood had an odd silvery sheen to it. Traitors, she spat. Rebels who forgot their place? Her fingers clenched on the edge of the table. They will pay dearly when I... Another wave of pain cut her off. Hold still. This next part won't be pleasant. He prepared a local anesthetic, though he had no idea if it would work on her physiology. So, space politics, gone wrong. You find this amusing, but there was less venom in her tone, now replaced by exhaustion. I find that talking helps distract from pain. He injected the anesthetic near a wound. Is it working? Can you feel this? She frowned. Feel what? Good. That's good. He started working on the deeper injuries. Want to tell me why you ended up in my backyard of all places? Navigation systems, damaged in the attack. Her words came slower now, either from blood loss or the medication emergency protocols targeted nearest habitable. She trailed off, eyes fluttering. Hey, stay with me, Your Majesty. He snapped his fingers near her face. Tell me about your world. Keep talking. Her silver eyes focused on him again. You are unexpectedly competent for a human. High praise. I'm blushing. Your sarcasm is less endearing. All part of the service. He finished another set of sutures. Growing increasingly concerned about her unusual biology, the wound seemed to react strangely to his treatments, as if her tissue was trying to regenerate, but couldn't quite manage it. Something's interfering with your healing, he muttered, more to himself than her. Some kind of energy disruption, her widened slightly. You can perceive that. I can see the tissue response patterns. They're all wrong. He met her gaze. What am I missing? She studied him for a long moment. The heart circuit, she finally said, damaged in the attack. Without it, regeneration is... Impaired heart circuit. He ran a hand through his hair. Of course, why not? Any chance you could explain how that works? Not in terms you would understand, Stan. But for the first time, there was something almost like respect in her voice. Try me. I'm a quick study. He began preparing fresh bandages. And since you're stuck with my primitive medicine for now, she sighed, the sound both imperious and oddly musical. The crystalline matrix that powers cellular regeneration requires precise energy alignment through the cardiac nodes, as she explained her alien biology in halting terms. Daniel felt a familiar spark of intellectual excitement. This was why he'd become a doctor, to solve impossible medical puzzles, to push the boundaries of what was possible. Look, where that had gotten him, but as he listened to Alia's weakening voice, described systems that defied human medical knowledge, he knew he was already committed. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she was now his patient, and Daniel Kane had never lost a patient. He was determined to save. Hours passed in a blur of improvised treatments and careful monitoring, and Alia drifted in and out of consciousness, alternating between imperious declarations and moments of raw vulnerability that she seemed to hate more than the pain. Your methods are antiquated, she muttered. As he changed her bandages, near dawn on my world, healing chambers would have already fixed this. Yes, you've mentioned that. Daniel checked her temperature again. Still far higher than human normal, but he had no baseline for comparison, unfortunately. The nearest healing chambers probably a few light years away. She turned her face away, but not before he caught the flash of fear in her silver eyes. When my people find me, are these the same people who shot you down? The words came out, sharper than he intended. Her silence was answer enough. Daniel sighed, gentling his tone. Look, I know this isn't ideal for either of us, but until you're stronger, you're stuck with my primitive medicine and sparkling personality. Your personal... It is far from sparkling, she said, but there was less bite in it than before. Now, who's mocking whom? He carefully helped her sit up to check the wounds on her back. Besides, I thought you were going to have me executed. Change your mind. I may still. She winced as he found a tender spot, though perhaps I'll grant you a quick death in recognition of your adequate care. Your generosity knows no bounds. He noticed something odd about the wound pattern on her shoulder blade. Geometric shapes that looked almost mechanical. What are these markings? She stiffened. Do not! but he had already traced one with his finger, trying to understand its structure. A jolt like static electricity sparked between them, making them both jump. "I told you not to touch those," she snapped, but her voice shook slightly. "What was that? Neural interfaces for controlling the ship?" She seemed to debate with herself before adding, "They're sensitive to bioelectric fields," meaning I just accidentally invaded your personal space on multiple levels. He couldn't help grinning at her affronted expression. "My apologies, Your Majesty. You are the most infuriating." She swayed suddenly, her skin dimming to a darker blue. Daniel steadied her with a hand on her uninjured shoulder. "Easy. Your body's been through a lot. I do not require—" But she didn't pull away from his support. "Course, you don't just humor me," he helped her lie back down, noting how her breathing had become more labored. The strange wounds weren't healing properly despite his best efforts. If anything, some seemed to be getting worse. "Something's still wrong," he muttered, rechecking her vitals. "The heart circuit you mentioned. How exactly does it connect to your normal healing process?" Her eyes had drifted closed. "Complex, crystalline matrix energy flow must be balanced. Stay with me." He squeezed her hand, trying to keep her conscious. "How would your healing chambers fix it?" "Quantum resonance," her words slurred together without proper alignment. Her voice trailed off as she lost consciousness completely. Daniel swore under his breath, mind racing through possible solutions. He was working blind, with an alien physiology he barely understood, trying to treat injuries that seemed to defy normal medical logic, just like old times. He pushed that thought away and focused on the immediate problem. Somewhere in his exile supplies, he still had some experimental equipment, things that might help him understand how her unique biology worked. Using them would mean reopening old wounds. Remembering why he'd retreated to this isolated place, but Azalea's breathing grew more labored, her luminescent skin dimming by the minute, he knew he had no choice. "Hang on, Your Majesty," he murmured, heading for the locked cabinet where he kept his past buried. Time to try something primitive. Daniel's hand shook slightly as he unlocked the cabinet he hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside lay the remnants of his controversial research prototype medical scanners and experimental treatment devices that had cost him his career. He grabbed the most promising ones and returned to Aurelia's side. Her skin had dulled to a deep twilight blue, the circuit-like patterns barely visible now. He attached the Thur interface scanner to her temple, watching as incomprehensible data scrolled across. The screen, "Come on, give me something I can work with," he muttered, adjusting the settings. The device had been designed to map complex neural pathways. Maybe it could help him understand her alien biology. Slowly, patterns emerged in the chaos of readings, energy flows that shouldn't exist in human physiology, complex matrices of light and power running through her body, and there, near her heart, a disruption in the pattern, like static in a signal. "The heart circuit," he breathed, finally seeing the problem. Whatever powered her natural healing abilities was out of alignment, like a broken circuit board. He reached for another device, one designed to stimulate neural regeneration through targeted energy pulses. It was the same technology that had gotten him branded as reckless and dangerous by the medical board, but right now it might be her only chance. "This might hurt," he warned her unconscious form as he calibrated the device. "Try not to execute me for it later." He activated the device, sending carefully controlled pulses of energy into her system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her back arched, silver eyes flying open as she gasped. "What are you?" Her words cut off in a cry of pain as energy coursed through her. "Hold still." He fought to maintain the connection. "I'm trying to jumpstart your healing system, you know." Nothing of another wave hit her, and her hand found his arm, gripping tight enough to bruise. "Make it stop." Just a few more seconds. He watched the scanner readings desperately. The disrupted patterns were starting to align, but if he'd miscalculated, suddenly her skin flared with brilliant light. The circuit patterns beneath it pulsed with silver energy, and she made a sound somewhere between pain and relief. Then, incredibly, her wounds began to close themselves. Daniel stared in fascination as her alien biology finally kicked in, regenerating damaged tissue at an impossible rate. When the process finished, she lay gasping but whole. Her skin returned to its original luminescent blue. That, she said when she could speak again, was excruciating but effective. He checked her vitals again, finding them much stronger. Your healing ability seems to be working now. The energy patterns are stabilized. She pushed herself up to sitting position, studying him with new intensity. You understood the heart circuit's function. Impossible. Your species doesn't have the technology to, let's just say, I have some experience thinking outside standard medical parameters. He began putting away his equipment. It's not exactly a proved experience, but it worked. Is that why you live in isolation? Your people feared your methods, something like that. He closed the cabinet firmly, locking away those memories again. How do you feel? She flexed her hands, watching the pattern shift beneath her skin. Functional, though. Your primitive technique was incredibly painful. You're welcome. I did not, thank you. No, but you haven't threatened to execute me in at least 10 minutes. I'm counting that as progress. A strange expression crossed her face, almost like she was fighting back a smile. Perhaps I shall merely have you imprisoned instead. Very generous. Though you might want to wait until you fully recovered before making arrest attempts. He noticed her swaying slightly. Speaking of which, you should rest. Even alien queens need sleep after major trauma. I do not take orders. From a yawn interrupted her imperious tone. Of course not. Consider it a medical suggestion from your primitive physician. She allowed him to help her lie back down, though she clearly wasn't happy about it. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. Daniel, he looked back, surprised to hear her use his name. Your methods? She seemed to struggle with the words. They were unorthodox, but effective. Coming from her, it was practically effusive praise. He smiled slightly. Get some rest, Your Majesty. We can work on your bedside manner tomorrow. Her quiet followed him out of the room as he finally collapsed into his own bed, exhausted from the night's events. Daniel wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. He had an alien queen for a patient, unknown enemies who might be searching for her, and medical challenges that would push even his unconventional methods to their limits. But for the first time in 2 years, he felt truly alive again. The thrill of solving impossible medical puzzles, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He'd forgotten how much he missed it, even if it came with a hefty side of royal attitude. Daniel woke to the sound of shattering glass. He bolted upright, momentarily disoriented before remembering his unusual patient when he reached his home. Clinic, he found Alia attempting to stand, surrounded by broken medical equipment. I assume there's a good reason you're destroying my supplies. He leaned against the door frame, watching her struggle to maintain her dignity while clutching the examination table for support. Your primitive monitoring devices were irritating. She straightened her spine, trying to project royal authority despite her shaking legs. And this has nothing to do with you trying to walk before you're ready? Her silver eyes flashed. I am perfectly capable of... Her knees buckled. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground, noting how she instinctively grabbed his shoulders. You were saying this is completely unacceptable, but she didn't push him away as he helped her back onto the table. I should be fully recovered by now. About that, he began checking her vital signs. Your healing ability seems to be working, but not at full capacity. Something's still interfering with the energy flow. Impossible. The heart circuit is only partially repaired. I bought you time, but without understanding more about your biology, he trailed off, studying the fading patterns beneath her skin. I need you to tell me exactly what happened to you. She turned away. The circuit patterns dimming further. It is not your concern. It is, if you want to heal properly. He moved to face her. Again, look, I get it. Talking to a primitive human about your problems goes against everything you believe in, but right now I'm all you've got. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, she spoke, each word seeming to cost her. There was a coup. Rebels who believed our civilization had grown too isolated, too convinced of our own superiority. Her laugh was bitter. How ironic that I now find myself dependent on proof of their argument. These rebels, they're the ones who damaged your heart circuit. She nodded. They used a targeted energy weapon designed to disrupt our biological systems. My ship's healing chamber might have repaired the damage, but she gestured at the wreckage around them. That is no longer an option. So, we'll have to find another way, he began, pacing, mind racing through possibilities. The crash site, there might be salvageable technology we could use, combined with my equipment. You believe you can merge your primitive medicine with our advanced technology? Her tone was skeptical, but he caught a hint of hope beneath it. I believe in solving impossible medical problems, he met her gaze, even if it means working with an insufferably arrogant patient. To his surprise, the corner of her mouth twitched, and it seems, must place my trust in an insufferably presumptuous doctor. Look at us finding common ground. Already he grabbed his coat. Think you can manage not to destroy anything else while I check the crash site? I make no promises. But there was something almost playful in her tone now, though. Perhaps if you hurry, your majesty develops a sense of humor. Will wonders never cease? Her soft laugh followed him out the door, and he found himself smiling despite the challenges ahead. The crash site looked different in daylight. Twisted metal fragments glinted among scorched earth, some emitting a faint blue glow. Daniel carefully collected anything that looked salvageable, particularly pieces showing the same circuit-like patterns he'd seen on Alia's skin. A metallic glint caught his eye. Half buried in the dirt lay what appeared to be a medical device, sleek alien design with crystalline components. He reached for it. I wouldn't touch that if I were you. He spun to find AIA leaning against a tree, looking pale, but determined. You should be resting, and you should not handle quantum medical technology without proper shielding. She pushed herself away from the tree, swaying slightly. Unless you wish to have your cellular structure rearranged, that would definitely complicate my day. He stepped back from the device, though I noticed you didn't mention this while sending me out here alone. Perhaps I thought rearranging your cellular structure might improve your personality. Careful, Your Majesty. That almost sounded like banter. He moved to support her as she stumbled. Since you're here, against medical advice, want to tell me what we're looking for? She allowed him to steady her, though he sensed it cost her. Pride to do so, the healing chamber's core matrix, if it survived the crash. She gestured toward a section of the wreckage there. They picked their way through the debris. Daniel noticed how she tensed every time she needed his help, as if physical contact with a human caused her actual pain, yet she didn't pull away. Your wounds, he said as they searched, they're not just physical, are they? The rebels didn't just attack your body. Her silence spoke volumes. The patterns I saw, they're part of how your people connect to your ships, to each other. The rebels didn't just strand you here, they tried to sever those connections. You understand nothing, she snapped, but her voice shook our neural networks, our shared consciousness. To be cut off, she steadied herself against a piece of wreckage. You cannot comprehend such isolation, maybe not. He watched her carefully, but I understand choosing isolation, running from who you were, what you could do, because your primitive medical board feared your methods. There was less condescension in her tone now, almost curiosity, because I pushed too far too fast, tried to solve problems without considering the consequences. He met her silver eyes. Sound familiar? She looked away first. Perhaps there are some things we might understand about each other before he could respond. She straightened suddenly. There, she pointed to a crystalline structure partially buried in the earth. The core. Matrix? Together, they uncovered the device. A complex arrangement of crystals and circuitry that hummed with faint energy. Aaliyah's skin patterns brightened in response to its presence. It's still functional. Her voice held wonder. With this and your unconventional methods, we might be able to properly repair your heart circuit. He studied the alien technology with growing excitement, though it'll mean combining our primitive human medicine with your advanced systems, a horrifying prospect. But she was almost smiling now, almost as horrifying as admitting that your primitive methods have some merit. High praise indeed. He gathered up the core matrix carefully. Speaking of horrifying prospects, ready to head back, unless you'd prefer to collapse dramatically among the wreckage of your ship. She raised an eyebrow. I do not collapse dramatically, no. What about last night when that was a tactical withdrawal? Ah, my mistake, and this morning's incident with the medical equipment. A strategic reorganization of resources. He couldn't help laughing. Is that what we're calling it? Would you prefer I return to threatening your execution? No need to stop on my account. I've grown rather fond of your creative threats. They made their way back to the house, their bickering masking the way they both needed the other support to walk. Daniel found himself increasingly aware of her presence, the warmth of her alien skin, the way her dark hair caught the sunlight with impossible colors, the growing animation in her silver eyes as she traded barbs with him. Dangerous thoughts, those. She was his patient, an alien queen, and definitely not someone he should be noticing in that way even. If her imperious attitude was becoming oddly endearing back in his clinic, Daniel connected the salvaged core matrix to his experimental equipment, trying to align the alien technology with his own devices. Aurelia watched from the examination table, occasionally offering sardonic commentary on his primitive attempts. You realize, she said, as he adjusted another connection, that if you connect those circuits incorrectly, the resulting energy surge could vaporize us both. Your confidence in my abilities is touching. He carefully twisted two wires together, though. I notice you're not stopping me. Perhaps I've grown curious to see if your reckless methods will prove as effective as before. She leaned forward to study his work, though connecting the quantum resonator to that crude power source has a better chance of working than your current strategy of backseat engineering. But he adjusted the connection based on her unspoken suggestion, unless Her Majesty would prefer to do this herself and deprive you of the opportunity to demonstrate your unique approach. The circuit patterns beneath her skin pulsed brighter as he brought the device online. Besides, if something goes wrong, I can always blame human incompetence. How generous of you. He checked the readings on his scanner, ready to try this. Her attempt at casual disdain didn't quite hide her apprehension. If you insist on this madness, I'll take that as a yes. He positioned the modified device near her heart circuit. This might feel strange. Tried not to vaporize me if it does, no promises. He activated the hybrid system. Energy flowed between the alien crystals and his modified equipment, creating patterns that matched the circuits beneath her skin. Aurelia gasped, her back arcing as the power surged through her. Talk to me, he demanded, watching the readings carefully. What are you feeling? It's realigning, her voice was strained, but steady, the neural pathways connecting again. She grabbed his arm, her grip painfully tight. Don't stop! The patterns under her skin blazed with silver light spreading outward from her heart circuit in complex geometries. Daniel adjusted the power flow. Guided by her reactions and his own medical instincts, it was like conducting an orchestra where half the instruments were from another dimension, but somehow there. Aurelia's eyes flew open, glowing with the same silver energy. The resonance is stabilizing, the readings confirmed. Her biological systems were reintegrating the damaged connections, healing when the process finished. She sat up straighter, her skin illumined with restored energy. Well, Daniel started disconnecting the equipment. How's it feel to be repaired by primitive human medicine? Surprisingly, she flexed her hands, watching the patterns flow smoothly beneath her skin. Effective. Her silver eyes met his, though. Your methods remain completely unorthodox. I'll add that to my collection of almost compliments from Your Majesty. He checked her vitals. One last time. Your hang ability should work properly now, though. You'll need time to fully recover. Time, she said the word like it tasted bitter. Stranded on this backwater planet, hiding from my own people. Could be worse. He started cleaning up the workspace. You could be stuck with a less charming doctor. I was unaware that charm was among your qualities. See? You're feeling better. Already your insults are getting sharper. A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh, perhaps. I simply needed practice dealing with your particular brand of, what do you humans call it, sass? Now, who's learning new tricks, he turned back to find her watching him with an unreadable expression. What, you are a puzzle. Daniel Kane, she said, his name carefully like she was tasting it. You live in exile using forbidden methods, yet you help, without hesitation. You mock my authority while respecting my dignity. You combine our technologies, when such fusion should be impossible. She tilted her head. Why the question? Caught him off guard. Maybe I just enjoy impossible challenges? Is that what I am to you, a challenge? Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. The imperial mask had slipped, showing genuine curiosity beneath, and something else. You're my patient, he said firmly, as much to himself as to her, who happens to be an fascinating medical puzzle, and occasionally entertaining company when you're not threatening my life. Only occasionally, her smile was almost teasing now. I must be losing my touch. I wouldn't say that. He found himself standing closer to her than he'd intended. Your touch seems perfectly, he cleared his throat. That is, your recovery is proceeding well. Her silver eyes sparkled with amusement. Are you flustered, doctor? Just concerned about your progress, he stepped back, trying to restore his professional demeanor. Speaking of which, you should rest, doctor's orders. But I outrank you. She gracefully slid off the examination table. Queen's orders, your royal authority doesn't apply to medical matters, does it not? She moved past him, close enough that he could feel the energy humming beneath her skin. How fascinating. We shall have to debate the limits of my authority later. She left him standing there, wondering exactly when their antagonistic doctor-patient relationship had evolved into something far more complicated. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Daniel would check Alia's recovery progress each morning, their medical discussions inevitably devolving into verbal sparring matches. That grew increasingly playful. She critiqued his primitive breakfast offerings while secretly developing a fondness for coffee. He'd pretend not to notice how she watched him, work her eyes, following his movements with growing interest. One morning, he found her in his study examining his medical journals with elegant fingers that left trails of luminescence on the pages. Light reading? He leaned against the doorframe, amused by how she didn't even pretend to be startled by his presence. Studying the limits of human medical knowledge, she turned another page, though. Your personal notes are far more intriguing. Snooping through my research, Your Majesty. How unroyal of you. Information gathering, she corrected, a smile playing at her lips, and finding that perhaps I underestimated human potential. Some of your theories about energy integration and biological enhancement, she tapped. One of his diagrams, they're not entirely primitive, be careful, that almost sounded like a genuine compliment. Perhaps exile has addled my judgment. She closed the journal, moving toward him with that ethereal grace that still caught him off guard. Or perhaps you're simply an anomaly among your species. Careful, he warned, though his pulse quickened as she drew closer. People might think you're developing a favorable opinion of humans. Not humans, she stopped. Just inside his personal space, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns shifting beneath her skin. Just one particularly presumptuous doctor. Now, I know you're still recovering. You're being almost nice to me. Would you prefer I return to executing you? Threats of execution, insults to my species, royal. Condescension, he pretended to consider it. Does have a certain familiar charm, she arched an eyebrow. Another quality you lack, along with proper respect for authority, says the Queen, who is currently invading my personal study. Everything on this primitive planet is technically my domain, but her imperious tone held a teasing note, now including presumptuous doctors who don't know their place. And where exactly is my place, Your Majesty? The question hung between them. Charge was something neither was ready to acknowledge. Aurelia's silver eyes met his, and for a moment, the royal mask slipped completely, showing vulnerability and want beneath. Then a crash from outside shattered the moment. They both tensed, years of respective training kicking in. That wasn't natural, Daniel said quietly, moving to the window. No, Aurelia's skin had dimmed, her posture rigid. They found me. 3 dark figures emerged from the woods, their armor gleaming with the same circuit patterns as Ayelia. Skin each carried weapons that hummed with ominous energy. The back door, Daniel whispered, already calculating. Escape routes through the clinic. No, Aurelia's voice held the steel of command. They'll expect that your primitive dwelling likely has a cellar route. Cellar under the clinic, but your equipment, the core matrix, we can't let them find it. Her silver eyes met his. Trust me. The way she said it, not a command, but a request, made him nod. They moved swiftly through the house, gathering essential equipment. Daniel grabbed his medical bag out of habit, earning a look from Aelia that might have been affectionate, exasperation. Always the doctor. Doctor, she murmured as they descended into the cellar. Says the queen who can't stop giving orders. Tactical guidance. She pressed against him in the darkness as footsteps sounded overhead. Important distinction. Her closeness was distracting, but the sound of his front door being blown open quickly refocused him. Voices spoke in an alien language above. They're saying the energy signature is strongest here, Aurelia translated in a whisper. They know I'm injured, vulnerable. They'll search thoroughly. Her skin dimmed further. I can't fight them in this condition. Then we don't fight, Daniel. Mind raced. We outsmart them. He pulled her deeper into the cellar to where his experimental equipment was stored. The core matrix hummed faintly, responding to Aurelia's presence. Can they track your energy signature? Yes, but her eyes widened as she caught his meaning. The matrix? If we overload it, it'll mask your signature and maybe take out their sensors and possibly collapse your primitive dwelling on our heads. You have a better idea, Your Majesty, her lips curved despite the danger. You truly are reckless. I prefer innovative. He began connecting the core matrix to his power supply. Besides, you like it? I tolerate it. But she moved to help him, her fingers brushing his as they worked for purely tactical reasons. The hunter's footsteps drew closer to the cellar door. Daniel's hands moved faster, connecting the final circuits while Aurelia monitored the energy levels. Her presence beside him was a tangible thing, her alien warmth both distracting and steadying. Ready, he whispered. No. She placed her hand over his on the activation switch, but do it anyway. He flipped the switch. The core matrix pulsed with blinding energy, sending waves of power through the cellar. Aaliyah gasped, her skin blazing in response. Daniel pulled her behind a shelf as the matrix overloaded, exploding in a burst of light and sound. The cellar door burst open above them. Through the chaos, Daniel glimpsed armored figures staggering, their sensors overloaded, Aaliyah tense beside him. Now, she breathed. While they're blind, they ran past the disoriented hunters, through the smoke-filled house, into the woods behind. Daniel led them along a path he knew well, though the sound of pursuit soon followed. They're recovering faster than expected, Aaliyah said between breaths. Her skin flickered with exhaustion. There's a cave system ahead. We can energy fire sizzled past them, scorching a tree. Aaliyah stumbled. Daniel caught her, noting how she didn't push him away this time. Your heart circuit, he realized. The explosion destabilized. In unfortunate timing, she tried to smile, but pain showed through. Though your dramatic escape plan did work, mostly worked. We're not dead yet. Your optimism is charming. She straightened with visible effort. The caves, how well do you know them? Well enough to lose our friends? He supported her as they ran. Though I'd prefer if you didn't collapse on me again. That was one. Time. Twice counting the medical equipment incident. I told you that was a tactical. She broke off as more energy fire lit up the forest. Less ENT, more running. They reached the cave entrance just as their pursuers came into view. Daniel helped Aaliyah inside, guiding her through the darkness. The sound of armored footsteps echoed behind them. They can track my energy signature. She whispered even. Weakened. Then we'll give them something else to track. He pulled out his modified scanner. Remember how we merged our technologies before, Daniel? The way she said his name made him look at her in the dim light. Her silver eyes held something intense. What you're suggesting will probably get us both killed. He grinned. Wouldn't be the first time, you. Impossible, man, but she was almost smiling. If we survive this, you'll execute me later, perhaps. Something else entirely? The promise in her voice made his heart race, but the approaching hunters demanded focus. He activated the scanner, modifying it to emit energy patterns similar to Aaliyah's signature. This will draw their fire, he explained, setting it up. While we circle around, an energy fire struck the cave wall above them. Aaliyah shoved him aside as rocks crashed down, but not before one of the blasts caught him in the shoulder. Pain exploded through him as they tumbled behind a rock formation. Daniel? Alia's voice held fear he'd never heard from her before. You fool, you absolute fool. Your bedside manner needs work, he managed through gritted teeth. Be quiet, quiet, she pressed her hands to his wound, her skin pulsing with failing light. This is why humans shouldn't play. Hero, says the alien queen, slumming it with primitive species. He tried to sit up and failed. We need to move. No, something shifted in her expression. No more running. What are you doing? Daniel watched as Aelia's skin began to glow brighter, the circuit patterns beneath it pulsing with increasing intensity, something forbidden. Her hands remained on his wound, growing warmer. Sharing life force with lesser species is technically treason. Can't have that on my conscience. He tried to pull away, but she held him firmly. Your Majesty? Aelia? She met his eyes, all pretense of royal distance gone. My name is Aurelia, and you will be quiet while I save your insufferable life. Silver energy flowed from her hands into his body. The pain in his shoulder transformed into a sensation he couldn't describe, like starlight running through his veins. He felt her presence in his mind, vast and ancient and beautiful. This is... He struggled to find words. Intimate. Her voice held both amusement and vulnerability. Yes, our peoples are not meant to connect this way. The neural bond is significant. Through their new connection, he felt everything. She wasn't saying her growing feeling for him, hidden behind royal protocol, her fear of losing him, her amazement at finding something she never expected in a primitive human so much. For your superior species, he managed, making her laugh softly. Yes. Well, you've proven... Surprisingly, she gasped as the energy transfer intensified. Exceptional. The wound began to heal, knitting together with impossible speed. But more than that, Daniel felt strength flowing into him along with something else. An awareness of her that went beyond physical sensation. They're coming, he said, sensing them through their shared connection. Yes. She helped him stand. Their minds still linked, but now we fight together. The hunters rounded the corner, weapons raised. But this time, Daniel and Aelia moved as one. She guided his movements through their bond while he anticipated her needs. The two of them dancing through combat like they trained together for years. Daniel's medical knowledge combined with her tactical experience as they disabled their attackers' weapons, his understanding of human anatomy merged with her knowledge of their weak points. Within minutes, the hunters lay unconscious. That was Daniel. Steadied himself against the cave wall, still adjusting to their connection. Unprecedented. Aurelia stepped closer, her presence in his mind warm and intimate. Impossible. Completely against every law of my people, I was going to say. Impressive, but those work too. He reached for her, drawn by their shared bond, Your Majesty, still with the titles. Her hand found his face, silver eyes glowing with emotion, after sharing life force, breaking multiple royal protocols. And she pressed closer. This, their first kiss, tasted like starlight, impossibility through their bond. He felt her one at the intensity of human emotion, while she sensed his awe at touching something so far beyond his world. When they finally parted, the last barriers between them had crumbled. The neural bond is permanent, she whispered against his lips. My people will not approve, and I'm still just a disgraced doctor living in exile. He brushed back her luminescent hair. Quite the pair we make. Yes, her smile held both mischief and tenderness, though I suppose I could use a personal physician. Someone familiar with both human and alien biology. Is that a job offer or a proposal? Perhaps both. She kissed him again, letting him feel her sincerity through their connection. Though, you'll have to work on your respect for authority. Never, he grinned. You'd get bored later. They sat by a fire outside. Daniel's partially destroyed house, the unconscious hunter securely bound with a combination of earth rope and their own disabled technology. Aurelia leaned against him, their neural bond humming with shared contentment. My people will send others, she said, watching the flames dance once they realized these hunters failed. Let them come. Daniel traced the glowing patterns on her arm, feeling her shiver through their connection. We make a pretty good team, remarkably good. She turned to study his face. When I first crashed here, I thought being stranded on Earth was a punishment, being forced to rely on primitive human medicine, and now I think perhaps the universe has an odd sense of humor. Her fingers found the healed wound on his shoulder, sending me to the one human who could not only save my life, but challenge everything I believed about your species through their bond. He felt the depth of her transformation from seeing humans as lesser beings to finding equality, partnership, and love with one. The royal barriers had fallen away, leaving something far more precious in their place. I still don't know if I'm more amazed by alien biology or by how many times you managed to insult me while I was saving your life, he teased. I believe the term you used was royal attitude. She smiled against his shoulder. Though you seem to enjoy our verbal sparring, among other things. He sent a wave of affection through their bond, making her skin glow brighter. So what now, Your Majesty? Back to ruling the galaxy, perhaps. She sat up straighter, though. She didn't move away from him. Though I'm thinking my people could benefit from some cultural exchange, learning to see beyond our perceived superiority, and you just happen to know a disgraced human doctor who might help with that. Indeed, her silver eyes sparkled with both mischief and determination. One who specializes in impossible cases and unconventional solutions sounds challenging, terrifying, more likely. She brushed her lips against his revolutionary. Even are you prepared for that, Daniel Kane? Through their bond, he felt the magnitude of what she was suggesting, not just personal transformation, but the potential to bridge their two species, to challenge entries of prejudice and isolation. It would be dangerous, difficult, and absolutely worth it. Well, he said, pulling her closer. I do enjoy impossible challenges. Her laugh held all the music of the stars she'd fallen from. Then perhaps getting shot down on this primitive planet was the best thing that could have happened to me. To us, he corrected, and kissed her again. As the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, bearing witness to a connection that defied both physics and prejudice. Born in crisis, but built to last across galaxies, dear listeners. What you've just experienced isn't just a story about an alien queen and a human doctor. It's a tale about breaking down the walls we build around ourselves, about finding connection in the most unexpected places, and about how love can transcend every boundary we think is insurmountable. Daniel and Aurelia's journey from mutual disdain to deep connection mirrors many of our own experiences with prejudice, pride, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a crash landing, and the most profound connections start with, "You dare touch me?" But is their story truly over? What challenges await our unlikely pair as they navigate a relationship that breaks every rule of both their worlds? What happens when they try to change centuries of ingrained prejudice? How will Daniel adapt to life among the stars, and how will Alia's people react to their queen's choice of a human partner? Perhaps most intriguingly, what about the rebels who tried to overthrow Alia? Are they truly the villains of this story? Or is there more to their desire to end their civilization's isolation? If you'd like to continue this journey with Daniel and Alia to explore these questions and discover what lies ahead for our star-crossed lovers, let me know. After all, sometimes the most interesting part of a story isn't how it begins, but what happens after the end. Would you like to see what adventures await our disgraced doctor and his alien queen? What new challenges they'll face together? What other impossible odds they'll overcome? Share your thoughts and desires. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we continue to tell together. If you've enjoyed this tale of love, prejudice, and healing across the stars, let me know. Every story has the potential for continuation, and Daniel and Alia's journey might just be beginning.